one of the Toyin Falola interviews. The Toyin Falola interviews have become a formidable contribution to policy making and sharing of knowledge. I am extremely pleased and privileged to be the one to anchor the program today. What we call in Yoruba, the Egun Nla, could not make it today, the big masquerade. The big masquerade was hampered by weather developments. He's waiting to see if he could finally board to go to Austin, having started yesterday from Florida. It's a long story. I don't want to bore you with that, but want to very much appreciate what he has been doing. I have never wanted to miss any of these Toyin Falola interviews. And I'm sure today will also be formidable in terms of the sharing of knowledge. I am Babafemi Adeshina Badejo. I have been involved in the knowledge arena for a while, but also been involved in the practical aspect of trying to deal with the question of peace and conflict and whatever, at the same time, development. Today, I will be anchoring a formidable number of people who have a lot to share with us on the question of insecurity. I will be coming down to saying a little bit more about each one of them. But for now, the issue of insecurity is of major concern to us in Nigeria, and that's what makes this topic very important. But what is security and what is insecurity? I will say that most of the time, the tendency when we're talking about security, insecurity, is to just think in terms of threats to life in the different ways, physical threats to life. But there are several other threats to life, which leads us into food insecurity, for instance, and anything that hampers what I call utmost freedom. And utmost freedom in this instance involving the desire of the human being to have all the things that are mentioned in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. If you pull all that together, you are arriving at what I have described as or conceived as utmost freedom. It is within that that you then have to deal with the question of security. But to have security overall is impossible if we are not considering several other factors at the same time. Security is interlinked, very seriously interconnected with the problem of peace, development, the human rights, and humanitarianism. But even all these that I've mentioned have to be situated within what is your governance arrangement? What is the external dynamics in which the decision of people to come together under a government is functioning? Beyond that is the question of the extent to which people have been able to build institutions to manage their affairs, as well as the availability of resources. All these, with the level of governance, borders on the question of leadership. If you can reduce the problems that we are talking about with respect to insecurity and wanting security to only one factor, it will be leadership, and that is the question of leadership being able to manage several other factors. But I don't want to take too much of your time in introducing the topic. We will definitely learn from several other people that formidable people who are going to be saying, telling us so much about what we are dealing with today. And in this respect, I want to mention the names of the panelists and what we can be expecting from them. I have in no order Dr. Hussain Abdu. Excuse me. Dr. Hussain Abdu is a public intellectual on international development and humanitarian. Oh, okay. The screen is being shared. And humanitarian leader with over 25 years of experience shaping policy, institutions, and large-scale programs across Africa. He currently serves as country director of CARE International in Nigeria, director of the Pan-African and Emerging Power Advocacy Office, representative to the African Union, and leads the high-level management with continental institutions on development, governance, and social justice. He was previously country director of Plan International and Action Aid in Nigeria, co-founder of the Pan-African Institute for Development and Humanitarian Praxis, and chaired the boards of YIAGA Africa and Partners West Africa. Previously was country director of Plan International in Nigeria and head of democracy and governance at Action Aid International, working across over 20 African countries and partnering with the AU, ECOWAS, SADC, EU, OECD, and UN. He holds a PhD in political science and author of a number of books, and has served in several capacities on the continent. I am also pleased to introduce Dr. Aderonke Esther Adegbite. She is an associate professor of law at Leeds City University, Ibadan, Nigeria, a development practitioner and an evolving voice in the fields of inclusion, African indigenous jurisprudence, and community development. With a distinguished academic and professional career of over 15 years, she has established herself as one of Nigeria's prolific scholars in community-centered legal research, indigenous knowledge systems, and multidisciplinary approaches to socioeconomic inclusion. She's a member of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, SIAP, UK, the Young Scholars Initiative, YSI, the Nigerian Bar Association, the Nigerian Association of Law Teachers, the NBA Women's Forum, the African Studies Center community, and multiple future Earth international research networks, including sustainability researchers in low and middle income countries, and the Earth system governance community. She's very grounded in deep scholarly training, extensive community engagement, indigenous cultural knowledge, and experience leading legal, corporate, and civil society institutions Dr. Adegbite brings an equally qualified voice to the high-level conversations on governance and development issues. She offers a rare blend of legal policy insight and cultural literacy qualities that position for strongly that position her strongly to contribute meaningfully to national level dialogues. You are very welcome, my learned friend. I also have Dr. Sam Amadi. Dr. Sam Amadi, a policy strategist and law and governance expert, is the director of Abuja School of Social and Political Thoughts and a visiting professor at the Emerald Energy Institute at the University of Port Harcourt. He is the chair of the Development Law Group of the Nigerian Bar Association's section on Public Interest Law and Development, SPIDEL, which he, as a founding council member, he was associate professor and head of Department of International Law and Jurisprudence at Bayes University, Abuja, until June 2021. He was a visiting research fellow at the Nigerian Institute of Advanced Legal Studies from 2016 to 2018. He was a fellow Carr Center for Human Rights and Policy, Kennedy School of Government, Harvard. He has, to his credit, numerous publications in both local and leading international journals and has drafted several policy papers which have been used to effect reforms across various sectors of the Nigerian economy. He presently chairs the Center for Public Policy and Research, Abuja, which focuses on innovation, development, entrepreneurship, accountability, and sustainability. The center is engaged in promoting digital wealth creation and entrepreneurship through the Owerri Digital Hangout. ODH, Owerri Digital Hangout, is a special intervention for very young people on technological innovation and digital technology. In its 2 quarters, the ODH has built the capacity of over 100 technologists and innovators in Imo State, a very budding incubator. Dr. Amadi is also the Chief Ideas Officer of the Lagos Fair Advisory, a public sector policy and strategy consulting firm in Abuja. He is also an honorary fellow of so many organizations, including the Society of the Project Management Professional International and Occupational Safety and Health of Nigeria. In 2016, he was awarded Kwame Nkrumah Leadership Prize for Excellence in Educational Development by the African Youth Parliament. I also have a very popular public affairs analyst in Nigeria, Dr. Majeed Dahiru. He is widely known for his incisive commentary in Premium Times and other leading national outlets where he writes on governance, national identity, social justice, and historical memory. He is also an energy security advocate. Born in Okene, Kogi State, Dahiru draws from a deep cultural and religious heritage, weaving personal narrative with sharp analysis in a style that resonates across Nigeria's diverse communities. His widely cited essays, including My Little Almajiri Story and The Future of History in Nigeria, reflects his commitment to education, civic responsibility, and the preservation of Nigeria's collective history. Beyond the printed page, Dahiru is a familiar voice on Nigerian broadcast media, contributing regularly as a guest analyst on radio and television discussions of national importance. Through his writing and public engagements, Dahiru has distinguished himself as a courageous voice for unity, fairness, and truth. He continues to shape national discourse, inspiring citizens and leaders alike toward building a more just and inclusive Nigeria. Majeed Dahiru studied geology at Kogi State University and currently serves as tech team lead at Lux Terra Leadership Foundation, Abuja. You will all agree with me that indeed we have a formidable panel that will be sharing knowledge and ideas with us. But we are not only going to be centered on the panel, the panelists alone. I would like to take some time to explain the format that we're going to follow. Again, we would have each panelist speak for 10 minutes. And as I pointed out, I'm not going to restrict what each panelist would say with respect to the problem of insecurity in Nigeria, how wide they want to define that security problem that covers the entire. It's easy when people very easily go on ethnic focusing, but Nigeria is really, if we're talking about physical insecurity, Nigeria has tremendous problem today, and the inability to handle that problem by our governance arrangement well, in terms of what we face from the northwest to the northeast to north central to the southwest, the south and the southeast in particular. So you will have as panelists the freedom to define, tell us a little bit about yourself, go a bit further to the topic, and introduce how you want us to look at the topic. But we must have it in mind when doing all that, that we should be thinking about providing some answers on what could be the way forward to deal with the problem of insecurity in Nigeria. Of course, in between the change from one panelist to the other, I might be interested in posing one or two questions, and we will have another round of responses to what some of the members, some of the panelists had said that another amongst them want to clarify or speak a bit more about. And after that, we will definitely bring in our audience with respect to they having the opportunity to intervene by way of questions or short comments. Having said that, I would at this stage want to call on Dr. Hussain Abdu to set the ball rolling and give us some 10 minutes on how he sees insecurity problem in Nigeria and what could be the way forward. I thank you very much, the audience. I need to point out that as our chief host normally does, that this program is being followed all over Africa and beyond, not just Africa, including the Europe and the Americas and all around the world. And it's also being aired on Facebook and YouTube beyond what we are doing on the Zoom arrangement. I should also point out that immediately after we have finished this interesting program, it will be released, and some of the media people who are listening to us as part of this arrangement will also put quite a number of what has been said or into print and electronic media. Yes, thanks a lot. I call on Dr. Hussain Abdu, a formidable colleague.
Yes, thank you very much, Prof. And well, I'm in Nigeria. Good evening, colleagues. Thanks for inviting us for this very potentially interesting conversation. Yeah, insecurity has become a major issue in the country. And in the last 2 years, I have decided not to examine Nigeria's current situation from a simple security perspective. I see it more as a huge and a very significant social crisis that has presented security as one of the symptoms. But insecurity, as we often describe it in Nigeria, it's a symptom of a larger crisis. And that's one thing that sometimes makes it extremely difficult for us to actually track and actually deal with the situation, because we see it simply as a security problem. And as a security problem, you think that some technocratic fixes will solve the problem. And so you need more arms, you need more policemen, you need more forest guard, you need to recruit more soldiers, you need to have vigilantes. And that's the approach to it, because it is a security problem. And so when it's a physical security problem, your response is simply, how do you secure people? And then securing people therefore becomes an arms issue, more uniformed men and all that. And we have seen that not working in the last 25 years. There are different expressions of this crisis. And that's one major area, because as a country, we also fail in our capacity to disaggregate this crisis and examine them on their individual manifestations. Take, for instance, the northern Nigeria has a long history of violent ethno-religious conflict. Banditry came in. We had insurgency, or we are dealing with insurgency in the northeastern part of the country for the past 15 years. And it is not abating. And while that remained unresolved, banditry escalated. And some of these things weren't just episodic. They didn't just emerge. There was history around them. There's a trend. And we have seen them grow to this escalating point. And what happened all these years? So practically every part of Nigeria has one element or forms of crisis of insecurity, as often described, or the other. There is virtually no part of Nigeria that is immune from issues associated with physical security. And when problem becomes that pervasive, isolating and examining it as if that specific insecurity concerns does not allow for a proper diagnosis or proper understanding, talk much of even finding the best way to deal with it. So when you have a deep-seated social crisis that is highly rooted on what I love to describe as silent violence, that historically development in the polity, the crisis in the economy, the rural dislocation has created long years of that silent fermentations of crisis that has led to where we are today. In the 1980s, one of the major issues in terms of insecurity in the Northwest and some part of the North Central Nigeria and even Northeast was what we were calling Kwanta Kwanta. People wouldn't even understand how Kwanta Kwanta grew to become cattle rustling, and from cattle rustling to where we are today. So when you talk banditry, well, the first thing that comes to people's mind is simply that, oh, it just came up. It's just something that just came up one day, and there are these lawless people who became criminals, and of course they are criminals, no doubt about it. But as people who try to understand the phenomenon, it is always very important for us to take it beyond that simplistic analysis of it. When violent ethno-religious conflict begins to escalate as Nigeria transitioned to civil rule, our initial discourse in the field was basically that, oh, democracy had let go some of those voices and grievances that were hitherto bottled as a result of military authoritarian rule. And then when you transition to democracy, it frees up people. And as people begin to express themselves, some of those grievances become intense. But democracy has its natural shock absorber that it could give room for civic engagement. And some of those civic engagement could actually lead to a state of equilibrium that will probably create a more peaceful atmosphere. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. It actually, because we had a very simplistic understanding of the drivers of these issues. So the first major escalation was in Kaduna by year 2000, 1 year after the transition. Kaduna was already boiling, and within 2 years there were very quick violence in Kaduna. One was described as Sharia, the other one was described as Miss World. It went to Jos, and Jos hadn't recovered from that violence for over 17 years. It doesn't recover. What you just get is that intermittent violence. So what we are experiencing is that each time one spectacular violence ensued, and before the country recovers from that, a new one erupts in another place. And therefore, having grasp of this and taking a bigger understanding of it has become extremely difficult. North Central today is massively boiling, and some of the clips we were shown before the start of this session did capture some of these dynamics. So I think conversations like this should be able to disaggregate the different expressions of violence. But the violence itself is driven by that social crisis, and its expression in the different part of the country is based on the prevailing contradictions in that region. So violence expressions or insecurity, as we describe them, are social crises, but they express themselves based on the prevailing contradiction in different parts of the country. So if you go to Northwest, for instance, where you have a strong a pastoral community, and then religion is a major player in terms of the social contradiction in such spaces, it is easy for the dynamics of violence to take that dimension, as we've seen in the Northeast, where years of economic, social, and material exclusion has created a huge bulk of young people who remain susceptible to social manipulations, and therefore can easily be used to trigger violence that actually have a religious expressions. If you go to the Niger Delta, for instance, oil is a major contradiction in that area, and therefore the nature of violence in that place will surely be shaped by the dynamics of oil productions and the contradictions that it generates. And that's why you get militancies and the whole discourse around the Niger Delta resource control and all those conversations. The same thing in the South, in the Southeast. The unresolved contradictions of the post-Civil War issues have remained completely, because we're a country where we never resolve anything. Issues just come, we brush them over, and then we want to move to the next thing. And when you have some of those unresolved issues, they'll continue to escalate. They'll continue to come intermittently from time to time. In the North Central, the whole historical post-colonial, pre-colonial, and the colonial politic and the structures of ethno-religious relations have continued to shape the nature of violence in those places. So whereas the expressions of violence in different parts of the country are quite different, but the social contradictions that drives them are the same. I hope we will get to those levels where we'll begin to define what are those social contradictions that shapes that. But the reality is that the violence expressions may be different across different parts of the country because of the specificity of the contradictions in different parts of the country. But the social crisis, the underlying factors that drives them are virtually the same. Thank you very much, Prof.
Yes. Yes, thank you very, very much, Dr. Hussain Abdu. You have made you have put us on the right track on the need to disaggregate issues in order to understand the fundamentals of the problems that we face. And you might need to be thinking about, yes, how do we go forward, having identified so some of the drivers of trying to establish, we have established the need for clarity on drivers of violence and looking at the social crisis in general, as well as the historicity of some of the problems that we are dealing with, today, especially in northern Nigeria, the combination of long pre-colonial the 1804 changes that came into the country and continues to be a major part of the problems that are manifesting in different ways. There is also the resource cost, chasing of mining and gold and all that. But think about some of these things as we come back to you in the next round. Meanwhile, I would like to call on the only lady, and on International Women's Day, we probably should have done better to add an additional lady, but we have one that is formidable and is able to share her thoughts on the problem of insecurity in Nigeria. Over to you, Dr. Aderonke Esther.
Thank you very much, Professor Badejo. I'm happy to be with you. Good evening, my professors. I'm happy to be among you this evening. So like I said earlier, I'm going to be approaching this from a Pan-African perspective, and there will be some couple of Yoruba and Ifa as we move on. And of course, it's applicable to the situation as we have of insecurity in Nigeria, as we have been called to discuss. So before I proceed, I would want to take us through what I call the state of default. From the Oromilai's perspective, what I will call the state of default. That is the foundation, which in some jurisprudence, they refer to as the ideal situation. I put it as the foundation, the default state, what originally existed, in many jurisprudence, you have it as, oh, the state of the foundational state is barbaric, and like the Thomas Hobbes would say, but that we are working towards the state of ideal. So according to Oduro Suwori, the gift conferred on us by Olodumare was àmọ̀tán gbogbo, ayọ̀ nígbà gbogbo, wíwà láìsí ẹ̀rù tàbí omi inú ọ̀tá, ìjà ijò tàbí ẹranko búburú mìíràn, láìsí ìbẹ̀rù ikú, àrùn, ejò, ọ̀fọ̀, oṣó, àjẹ́ tàbí èṣù, láìsí ìfarapa omi iná, ewé oró tàbí ìwọ, láìsí ìbẹ̀rù àìní tàbí òṣì. So that's in Yoruba, Orumila's perspective. I'll translate that to English now. Knowledge that is complete and a state of happiness that never diminishes, a state of harmonious existence in which man has overcome all his fears, such as fears of the hostility of enemies, the attacks of snakes or other ferocious beasts, a state of existence in which there are no fears of death, illness, losses, court cases, witches, wizard, or issue, and so on. And with this, he has given us the wisdom of the wisdom of Asua, that is, in us as human beings, we possess the capacity to remain in this state, and if we have gone off it, to bring ourselves back to this state. So what this part is saying is that the solution lies in us, just as the destruction has come from us. There's nowhere else to go. So on that foundation, I would want to go into the discussion of today, which is on the meaning of insecurity and the state of insecurity in Nigeria. I'll pick it up from where Professor Badejo started during his introduction, that insecurity itself is not limited to physical insecurity. It is a multi-dimensional concept, and you can have different types of insecurity, and I would say they are equally important, because eventually we realize that they are interconnected. One leads to the other. For example, in Nigeria, just as we are discussing physical insecurity, yes, the fact that the concept of insecurity wasn't personalized to this discourse, so I believe we are free to move around. So just as we have physical insecurity, we could have cyber insecurity, we could have social insecurity, we could have political insecurity, economic insecurity, health insecurity, food insecurity, a lot of them. And they are interwoven. In a situation where we have political insecurity, breakdown in rule of law, we cannot have safe elections. Politicians have to weaponize those that have economic insecurity, those that do not have jobs, illiterates, weaponize religion to stay legitimate. Then, of course, the eventual situation is loss of lives and, of course, physical insecurity. So insecurity often is that state of uncertainty, the state of unsafety at whatever level, whether personal, economic, or, as I've mentioned, where the victims or the persons in question really do not have faith in any institution, whether the government, stakeholders in any institution, to bring about recourse. Now, at what point will a person decide to pick up arms against another person in the same country? At what point will a person decide to rape another person within the same community, even as neighbors? At what point will a leader wish to sacrifice his community members just to remain in power? At what point will someone wake up to say, I'm going to terrorize this government until you do my bidding? In my opinion, of course, when that person suffers from one of the several forms of insecurities that we have identified, economic insecurity, there's no job, there's no money, then I pick up arms. I don't care whether it's my mom. I don't care whether it's someone dear to me that I have to eliminate just to put food on my table. If I have to kill my neighbor's family to feed my own family, it's about feeding. At what point do we move from this perfect state of default that I've explained to a situation where we do not care? From a peaceful Nigeria to what we have today, just as Prof has said earlier on, where you cannot even say this is the particular form of insecurity we are suffering from. We have another dimension in the north, we have another dimension in the east, we have another in the west, we have it all scattered about. At that point where our relationship has broken down, the issue of insecurity is relational. It is basically relational. When my obligation to you as a human being is no longer relevant to me, when the government's obligation to protect me is no longer important to the government, when among siblings, the obligation to protect the vulnerable ones, obligation to cater, to develop, has broken down. Relationally, when neighbors do not see themselves as obliged to live in peace, when people that have been forced together to live in one Nigeria begin to think that persons of birth, persons of the same race, persons of the same ideology, wherever they are, even when they are not in Nigeria, are more important than their immediate neighbors. When they pick up arms against those who contribute directly to their sustenance in favor of those who are far away. And of course, in the course of this discourse also, I would say, is anybody far away? We are talking about whatever situation we have found ourselves now. Something is happening in Iran, and you are feeling the ripple effect in Saudi Arabia. That is how harmonized the human race is. So that's, to me, I came from the sociological angle. I borrowed some parts from the sociological angle, and of course, the Orunmila angle, especially that of the late Akin Akinwowo, on his explanation of the variation of relationship from Ajobi to Ajogbe to Aswada, which I hope we'll be able to explain as time goes on. Then I can put in some angle from law also, which is to the effect that, and I'll come from where Professor Babafemi Bade just started initially, that again, it boils down to leadership. The rule of law, sociological jurisprudence in law, provides that we are to use law as the instrument of social engineering, meaning that the government is conferred with the power and obligation to use law in whatever way to harmonize existing conflicts in the system, provide fundamental human rights, ensure security in all forms, protect the rule of law, And a lot of things that will come from the government trickle down to the citizens and take us to this harmonious situation that we have referred to. But on the contrary, what do we have? Present state of situation is one in which I would say it's like our governments are usually more interested in its legitimacy, retaining its legitimacy, to prefer that to looking into all these types of insecurity that we have mentioned, including physical insecurity, and ensuring that each of this is well taken care of through inclusive policies, laws, morals, cooperative, and appropriate agenda. So I'll stop there, and thank you, sir.
Wow, wow. You really blew my mind apart because I am discovering that we share several fundamentals. I thought it was just a question of being lawyers, but the person you mentioned was an academic mentor of mine. When you were talking about Ajogbe, that Professor Akinshola Akiwowo took me through at UCLA when he was visiting as a professor then, all those were some 40 years ago, to still have people who are trying to relate a different orientation in terms of the point you are making that takes reality far away from the conception that we had gotten from our colonization that saw the beginning of relationships in terms of the Hobbesian state of nature and defining a different state of nature, doing some of what I would have wanted to do or that I actually wanted to do as a young man, to go deeply into Ifa, to understand what were the conceptions on reality. So it is not that we created social contracts out of chaos, but that what you are suggesting is that we had a perfect state which we degenerated and have the capacity to bring back, as opposed to sitting down and praying that it's going to happen. I'm adding that from my own perspective. In any case, it's much appreciated in terms of what you have stated. But you said that the solution is in us. We will need to start dealing with that question of what are the possible solutions that we can put on the table when we come to the next round. And excitedly waiting for your contribution thereafter. I will go on to Dr. Sam Amadi, who has made quite a lot of contribution nationally and internationally to have his own 10 minutes. Thank you, Dr. Amadi.
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you, the co-panelists and the audience for this interaction. Like they say, a worry, I think, say teach, make I teach, name the text Sabi. So as I'm here, I'm also learning from everybody. But I thank Abdu, Hussain, and my sister Aderonke for very wonderful reflections. So, like Prof started by saying that insecurity or security is multidimensional. So, you have to look at it from a particular perspective and a particular context. Generally, it's even difficult to say if there's a time the world or a section of it is not in state of insecurity. So it could be social insecurity. We talk about human security. So there are dimensions, and because there are dimensions, at a particular time and a particular place, you may have to focus on a particular security that is deficient or a particular security that is in that context, missing or deteriorating. So I would say that if you look across the world, you will see maybe people in America who probably would feel more physically secure than we are, could feel socially insecure, less so in the Scandinavian and so on and so forth. So just on the line, that I would like to look at security in some kind of bodily, physical sense, both psycho, and spiritual, social, psychomotic, in terms of physical, what we can lump together as physical security. Again, to say also that one of the things, I think, to make it more practical is to say we're witnessing deterioration. So insecurity has always, we've never had a period where we don't have insecurity, but we have had worsening, dramatically worsening insecurity. And so that's the question now. Why so? Why is it that Nigeria is perhaps one of the most terrorized, fragile and insecure countries in the world? And then I would like to look at some of the drivers. What are the things that are really up here? Now, central rule of law, building on my sisters, whether you look at the state of nature and the exit, whether from Hobbesian or Lockean perspective, whether the exit is driven by a concern for more human flourishing. We are good, but we need it to be better, or whether the exit is driven by fear of death. We are going to kill ourselves if we exercise our individual rights in a state of nature. However, the central point here is that people create political community, and the base of it is some sense of rule of law. And so, what is the problem with Nigerian insecurity? It's actually that we've seen some degree of deterioration in rule of law status. Again, one of the things globally is that every country claims to be rule of law country. So China is rule of law, Russia is rule of law, everybody claims rule of law. Nigeria claims to. But so the debate is it rule of law by virtue of having laws, or rule of law by virtue of those laws themselves embodying some sense of justice, fairness, equity, and so on. But I look at this from a structural and functional sense. And that means that when I say the problem of insecurity or heightened insecurity in Nigeria is the fact that Nigeria has also deteriorated in its rule of law. And I mean that in first, the fact that there is a sense in which law and order breaks down because the law does not bind. Neither does it bind the criminal, nor does it bind those who exercise state authority. So lawlessness shows up in generalized, what I use the word generalized insecurity. So it's generalized because there is generalized lawlessness in that the norms, maybe not from formal, informal as well, the rules are indeterminate, the rules are oftentimes absent, but also the underlying norms, culture, and procedures that make those rules stick are also absent and deteriorating. So that's one issue. The other is also some sense of gross socioeconomic inequities, gross. So whether you're looking at northern Nigeria, northeast, northwest, or you look at southeast, there's a sense in which interparties within institutions, within the same class. So we can look at socioeconomic inequalities or inequities, I prefer that word, from the geopolitical. So people in the southeast or southwest could feel what they now call marginalized, a sense in which the law fails them, the social system of justice fails. But within a class, whether northern Nigeria, some group within there feel so marginalized, socioeconomic poverty, helplessness, so much. Many people in Nigeria are so living below minimum, basic, fundamental, measures of dignity of life. I mean, they realize poverty, the exposure to vulnerability, I could argue, is probably the extreme in the whole of West Africa. I mean, people look at our maybe per capita income. If you look at Nigeria GDP per capita, even though it's very poor, it paints a lovely picture. But when you look at vulnerability assessment across West Africa, those poorer, Niger, Togo, Benin, who are, by definition of problems, you discover that Nigerians are one of the most socially insecure people in the world. They have access to nothing. So this group of left behind, which is a growing army, are in a state of war with society and society against them. So that is one of the drivers of generalized insecurity. So you see kidnapping, terrorism in the North Nigeria. You also see versions of the same insecurity across everywhere, arising from very extreme removal from any center of meaningful economic life. And so that failure relates to the fact that instead of having a chapter 2 in our constitution that proclaims in lofty language access to basic economic rights, socio-economic rights, what they call the fundamental objective and directive principle of state policy, the Nigerian statecraft is perhaps the most bereft of any commitment to a modicum of social welfare. That explains that. Again, then it goes back to also some very virulent form of ethnic and religious prerogatives, exemptions. Nigeria is a country that runs on many exemptions. So people are exempted from everything. So there's ethnic exemption. So if you come from a particular ethnic group that has either at that particular time control of power, you seem to get exempted from the rigor of law. So religious exemption, we exempt ourselves. There are no common rules. And that's very clear. I mean, think about it really. How can you have a republic that has two concepts of citizenship? People don't see the contradiction. Very few scholars, surprisingly, that if you have a public criminal Sharia, the debate we're having in Nigeria, which looks like, because we don't like to talk about religion, it looks like it's a taboo. But you can't just have a country where a state enforces public religious law. By so doing, that state creates multiple, double citizenship. That's why a place like Indonesia, which are religious, maybe religious majorities, you see communism. So Nigeria is difficult to be defined as a democracy or a modern state because it's, in my view, is close to a neo-feudal theocratic state because it carries a lot of deference to ethnic and religious exceptionalism. And what that does to security fabric is that it creates strong, people can override the requirement of due process of law and order. And so you see it, whether in terms of what's going on in northern Nigeria, some Hausas claim, or Fulanis claim that some Hausa rustle their cattle, and the state law cannot, perhaps deal with that phenomenon. And then these frustrated, victimized Fulani herders take to kidnapping, terror, or reverse cycle. The Hausas themselves feel, violated by the Fulanis who are more powerful, and then the law does not, settle their cause. Then they take to other form of violence, and this is not a new phenomenon. In Shoyinka's book, The Man Died, he noted a very important section there where he was in prison, and he saw some Nigerian military officers rejoicing who were involved in killing some Igbo soldiers many years ago. And Shoyinka noted that he was shocked that people who committed such actions, the state kind of gave them some kind of free pass. And instead of being prosecuted, these guys were, so Shoyinka says the man died. Shoyinka noted that the problem of that crisis was the failure of rule of law. I want to argue that we are still seeing the same failure of rule of law in multiple dimensions. Still, the underlying cause of the aggravated insecurity. And so when you create a system where there's too much ethnic, religious, exceptionalism, whether it's in the Southeast, somebody can commit a crime, maybe in the furtherance of an agitation, or in the Southwest, and the state kind of grants him an exemption. You are entrenching in insecurity. Let's look at two examples. I mean, look at the IPOP, for example. If you look at IPOP, it came out before 2006. Southeast UNDP noted is one of the most peaceful, in fact, it was the most peaceful region. What changed? What changed? A combination of many factors. One, politicians through an election empowered, talks and criminal elements to rig the election, gave them guns. And these guys, after the whole enterprise, didn't quite see themselves in government, nothing. And they held back their gun, used that as a means to extract vengeance from state that has used them, dump them. Two, the Biafra franchise going on, people, as the Nigerian state fails, and as the perception of victimization by the Nigerian state continues, this otherwise fringe peripheral phenomenon becomes mainstreamed. I recall when I was special advisor to Foreign Affairs Minister Joe Made under Yar'Adua, whenever I go to the US, we hear about this Biafra. It was just a few people who feel angry, but it snowballed. It became. I was addressing an MBA law week in Owerri, and I was speaking about state police and looking at the constitution and talking about how state governors have some ambit of power to grapple with security. I was shocked. They did. Professors, SAN, they started talking about Nnamdi Kanu, and to my amazement, these guys, professors, the educated class, were the champions of saying, Sam, you're talking nonsense. You don't want to hit it at the head. They were all pro Nnamdi Kanu. What would make professors of law, what would make deans of law school suddenly be so enticed by a group that are concerned about the injustice the perceived Nigeria does to them, and are voting against the Nigerian state and supporting somebody outside Nigeria who is basically, rhetorically, waging war against Nigeria? That tells you the level of alienation. The fact that they see the Nigerian state as a executor of violence against them. And so these issues will not address. And so if you go to the Southwest, the North, for example, look at what's happening in the middle belt of this country. Whether it's Christian genocide or Muslim genocide or Christian-Muslim genocide, the critical point is that people are not being protected qua citizen simply as citizen, not citizen as Christian Northerner, not citizen as a Muslim. So the failure of citizenship in its multi-dimensional sense is at the heart of this enhanced insecurity. And to round up, this now builds back to weak and failing institutions. State institutions are weak and failing. They have always been weak. Nigeria has had weak, but I mean, it's now almost like non-existent. The Nigerian institutions have been weak, but the whole erosion, the dynamics, socioeconomic dynamics that have eroded even their bare existence. We're not talking about strong institutions anymore. We're talking about whether these institutions exist as institutions. In the classical definition of institutions are, informal, formal systems of constraints and enablement. So if the so-called Nigerian institutions cannot constrain neither the government nor a section of the people who are moving against others, they can't constrain them. They don't exist. So I argue that the lack of institution is also the gross weakening of institutions is a part to play. And maybe the last point I'd like to raise before I round up with 2 minutes on the way some idea of the way out is, look, the problem can be summed up in 2 words: growing illegitimacy. and growing ineffectiveness. State legitimacy. I mean, legal legitimacy, yes, government has legal authority to govern. But politically and socially, the government becomes very illegitimate. Disconnection. People don't have a sense of trust in the government. Everybody feels offended by the state, Nigerian state. And in many ways, you can call it the silent aggression of the majority. People are aggressing against the state in many ways, taking out their vengeance, whether through kidnapping, whether through destroying public property, whether through threatening their neighbors. That's growing illegitimacy. And secondly to that is the ineffectiveness. Look, this country has government, but we have no governance. If you go to most of these so-called, these northern places where you say there's rising security, you can't see one government presence. I've driven through swaths of arable lands, and you wonder, why can't these lands, Sambisa, whatever you call it, turn into agricultural zones? You go through Europe, you see very large landscape of agri-industries with roads, with water, with forest guards. It'd be difficult. No, we have abandoned large part of Nigeria to terrorists because government is not visible. There are places in this country where after local government allocation, they share it at the headquarters. There's no local government so-called anywhere. The money ends at the government capital. The rest of the place is totally abandoned. Nobody, no person. So the terrorists are not as sophisticated. What is happening that the bulk of Nigeria is on governed territory. There's no effective governance. Every part of Nigeria has a local government. If those local governments were working and they had real governance, rule-based processes, engagements, network, they talk to the people, they mobilize them. It's difficult to have these places surrendered and pay tribute to mercenaries and terrorists. The point is that for many years, bad governance, corruption, this government withdrew from the people, from Nigeria territory. Government concentrated around urban centers and state capitals, shared the money, never created wealth, never imposed their presence, and never governed those areas. Yes, we have government, but we don't have governance, limited governance. So the answer, therefore, is in the problem. We need to begin to deal more coherently and radically with the failure of rule of law in its multi-dimension. We need to build citizens who have rights, who the state recognizes as citizens, who have agency, and government that engages people and show presence, and therefore create habitable governed spaces to reduce the ungoverned spaces. And then if we do so, we'll begin to rebuild back control. And then we can match that with some kinetic action with American fighter bombs and American boot on the ground. But if we don't do this, we'll probably end up like Afghanistan before the last rescue operation, or any of those places that are basically dead places with no government. Thank you so much.
Yes, very, very interesting. I thank you tremendously, Dr. Sam Amadi, for the effort you have put into showing that it is ourselves that saw to the deterioration in the rule of law that built the situation that we are facing today. And you have started trying to deal with the question of how we may likely be able to move forward. Of course, there's still going to be the other round that would still allow you to expatiate further on some of these. Let me hasten to suggest something that you equally mentioned, and that is important, and that comes into my own formulation of what I call situational quadruple nexus analysis. The situational being the foundation on which all these things rest, which I mentioned earlier on, governance, and governance being very, very crucial. And in talking about governance, before looking at external dynamics, the problem of institutions, which you rightly mentioned, and the issue of resources not being limited to the fact that people are now saying we have rare earth minerals in the north. It's not only oil in the south that is, in fact, this one is more than that. Human resources we face problem on. But I do want to say what I have actually been saying for quite a while, that there is a clear inverse relationship between the rule of law and corruption. The more of one, the less of the other. And there is no way by which we're going to move forward in governance, in realizing the rule of law, if we are not at the same time tackling the problem of corruption. Of course, you introduced that as you spoke, and it is fundamental in the case of Nigeria today, that the issue of ungoverned spaces that you mentioned. But I don't want to, I just want you to look at some of these, expatiate further in the next round of the dialogue, and allow Dr. Dahiru, who had been very, very patient in going through much of listening eagerly, but somebody who I know a little bit of, and know that again he has the advantage of being part of the different makeup of Nigeria, being from the North Central and very much involved in what is going on in the northern part of the country, as well as in the southern part of the country. Yes, we are open to ideas from Dr. Majeed Dahiru on on Nigeria insecurity problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me also thank my fellow panelists for making my own job very easy. They have touched on some very critical issues, diverse areas of very thought-provoking presentations that sheds more light on the subject matter under discussed today. So my job is so simple. So I'll take it off from the historical perspective. You see, Nigeria, right from the beginning, those we love to refer to as our founding fathers, negotiated from the British authorities a Nigerian state that was structured ab initio along the geographic and religious fault lines. This is because our founding fathers believed that Nigeria was irreconcilably different. Nigerians are irreconcilably different and cannot be one nation. And so to manage the space, to have something, a semblance of a nation, will be one that will be a multi-ethnic nation state, wherein everybody will have some space, from the regions to the provinces, to the native authorities. It was as though there was a careful gerrymandering of the structure of state along ethnic and religious, ethnographic and religious lines. Now, what this did for Nigeria was that it actually built a very strong foundation for a Nigerian state that will be weak and continuously weakened as the years go by. And that is why 66 years after independence this year, Nigeria is at its weakest point, a fragile state that is teetering on the brink of state failure. Now, why is this so? And what has the relationship between a federating unit that was structured along ethnographic fault line has to do with what we're facing today? You see, when that was done, it firmly established something in the polity that is still at the core of the problems we are facing today. First and foremost, a structure of states that was delineated along ethnogeographic fault lines, which made it very difficult for assimilation and integration to happen, as is the case in a modern nation state, meant that the concept of democratic citizenship that Dr. Amadi dwelled on so much was absent right from the beginning. So Nigerians were outsiders inside their own country, provided that they resided outside of their ancestral areas of origin. Now, this dichotomy also created another phenomenon, which was the politics of ethnic and religious identity. Because Nigeria was a democracy between 1960 and 1966. Our democratic structures and culture, including the political party system, was firmly built on religious, ethnic, and regional identity. And it was a very open secret because, for instance, the governing party of the Western region then, the AG, Action Group, was evolved from the Egbe-Emo Duduwa cultural, socio-cultural group, while the NPC, the Northern People's Congress, was evolved from Jemia Remutan in Arewa. Whereas the Eastern region was originally governed by the NDCNC, which was a pan-Nigerian political party. But you'll agree with me that sooner than later, the NDCNC itself retreated, receded, and became an Eastern regional political party. There's this common joke that Azikiwe started off as Zik of Africa and later ended up as the Owel of Onitsha. That clearly demonstrates the progress or a lack of it that we made as a nation. And so when you have identity politics firmly in the politics, I mean, I grew up, for instance, to realize that where I come from in Kogi, the two dominant political parties were known as the Ibira Tribal Union, ITU, and the Ibira Progressive Union. you had Urubo Progressive Party, you had tribal parties across the country, such that identity politics became the norm. There was no collective aspiration for a development agenda for the collective Nigerian interest. So what happened is this. As political science scholars all over the world, and I'm sure Dr. Abdu Hussain will know this better than all of us, identity politics has a major reward system. The reward system for identity politics is patronage, a corrupt form of patronage system, which sees the state being controlled by political conquerors. So identity politics does not bear the fruit of good governance for all. No, it's a zero-sum game where the winners take all. So because of that reward system that is steeply immersed in corruption, corruption in Nigeria became a culturally, politically, traditionally, and religiously legitimate tool to extract reward from the common pool, what you call the national cake, to the various sections of the country, with the extractors as the major beneficiaries. This is the beginning of the endemic corruption in Nigeria that today cannot be solved by state institutions. Now, another fallout of this structurally induced identity politics is such that when corruption became the order of the day and became the raison d'etre, if you like, a special phenomenon also known as I forgot how the political scientists define it. Prebendalism. Prebendalism became the order of the day because for the Nigerian political class, either appointed or elected, there is a sense of entitlement over the resources accruing to their areas of responsibility. So ministries, department and agencies became the fiefdom, political fiefdom of politicians under a prebendalicist arrangement. Now, what has happened is that this prebendalicist kind of corruption has now induced economic crisis and insecurity as a result. So what you have today as insecurity in Nigeria is an accumulation of corruption-induced economic crisis that actually now boiled over into a form of insecurity that goes beyond just crime and criminality. And we must understand this. Crime and criminality is not what we're dealing with in Nigeria. What we're dealing with is legitimate, sexually legitimate insurrections that threatens the corporate existence of the Nigerian state. Boko Haram is not just a criminal activity. Banditry is not. Separatist elements in the southeast are not just mere criminals. Agitation in the Niger Delta are not just pickpocket criminals. These are centers of grievances that have deep legitimate roots in the various sections where they are operating. And this is the problem we have to look at. And why has this become so? Whereas the military tried to unify Nigeria and blend our various identities into a super pan-Nigerian nationalistic identity. But the failure there was that the foundation for a united, socially cohesive Nigeria that should have prevented the situation we are faced with today was not well institutionalized before it was handed over back to civilians in 1979 and later in 1999. So whenever Nigeria transits from military to civil democratic rule, we all resort to identity politics to galvanize political support. And because of this situation, our democracy, at least in 1999, which has been driven by this same identity politics, has shown up mostly ethnic champions, religious bigots, into positions of authority. Because that was on the basis of which they were elected. So they have to defend the various tendencies in the country, leaving Nigeria without any national consensus on how to manage enough its resources or to manage its national security. So, and because all of the multi-ethnic nationalities in Nigeria are identity-driven, our loyalties are essentially to our ethnic groups, our region of origin, and our religious thinking inclinations. There is this fierce contestation for power to control Nigeria's internal resources. So that over-focus on internal resources and the first contestation for the power to control who gets what, when, and how has further weakened the state and deprived the state of the capability to enforce law and order, provide welfare for citizens, and ensure its own rules and regulations, which are symptoms of a failing state. So what we are faced with in Nigeria today is that we are dealing with a situation where Nigeria is not only fragile, but exhibiting mild symptoms of state failure, arising from the inability of the Nigerian nation, or the Nigerian state rather, to evolve from a country of tribesmen to a nation of citizens. Therefore, as we speak today, Nigeria as an identity-driven democracy cannot uphold the rule of law because tribesmen are not known to obey law. And when they have authority to enforce law, they enforce it in a manner that favors only their own section. And because of identity politics, the various leaderships in this country across all of the sections are pandering to base sentiments of their people, be it religion, be it cultural, be it, whatever. And so today, Nigeria is confronted by major and petty theft, unlike what happened in South Africa or in the United States. Boko Haram insurgency, for instance, one of the most debilitating security challenges Nigeria has faced, that is threatening to actually liquidate Nigeria's defense capabilities if something is not done urgently, is a manifestation of Islamism, particularly in northern Nigeria. Islamism itself was also a manifestation of political Islam because the political leadership in the north used religion to galvanize vote and to seek for support. when contesting for public offices because of the widespread phenomenon of Islamism in the region, which effectively began in the early 70s, the Sharia movement, the quest to have an Islamist kind of state within what is supposed to be a secular, multicultural, and multi-religious Nigeria. So politicians, rather than rising above this sentiment to correct the people, they actually descended into the fray, took advantage of this sentiment and said, we're going to use authority to advance this agenda. And so political Islam became an important tool in northern Nigeria to negotiate for power. But unfortunately, when they got to power, the rivers of this world and his colleagues implemented Sharia in a manner that didn't satisfy the needs and wants of those who desire Islamism as a way of attaining utopia in this world. And so what happened? They became convinced that political Islam cannot work. They don't think they can work towards the same goal as jihadism, violent jihadism. And so what you see today as Boko Haram insurgency is a violent manifestation of Islamism that politics have failed to deliver in enough dosage for those who desire it. Now, if you look at banditry in the Northwest, banditry rose to the peak in this country when you had a president, a leadership in this country that was clearly conflicted in terms of his ethnicity, his region of origin, and his citizenship of Nigeria. And I'm talking about the Buhari administration. President Muhammadu Buhari did not hide his bias, his ethnic bias, for the section of the country that we are neck deep into this culture of banditry. There was no excuse on earth that the commander-in-chief of the armed forces did not make through official and non-official channels to sort of beautify banditry. And the more that was done, the more the bandits gained momentum, became emboldened, took advantage of the weakness of the state and the indecision of the commander-in-chief, and now became an army of occupation of your city today. By the time they took the decision to declare bandits as terrorists, it was already too late. They had crossed the red line where the Nigerian armed forces, with all of its capabilities, can no longer contain them. I'm on record to have described our former president as one of the most sectional presidents we've had in the history of Nigeria, so that his sectionalism, both ethnic and religious, hampered his functionality as commander-in-chief. And that is the reason why banditry festered to the point where today it's becoming almost intractable. Again, if you look at his rise to power, he was one of the first presidents in Nigeria who rose to power on a powerful ethnic and regional power sentiment. And so when he came to power, he needed to satisfy the 97 percenters over and above the 7 percenters that didn't vote for him. That's a topic for another day. This is the situation across board. You see, like Dr. Amadi pointed out, when you have ethnic champions in power, they favor their own section and marginalize others. So it creates a multi-layer of dissent, and resistance, or sometimes resulting to violence. This has been the situation. Yes, failure of leadership is key, but this leadership was one that failed because of the process that produced and still produces our leadership. As we speak, the current president, who is a hardball politician, is unwilling to go against certain vested interests in northern Nigeria because some people still have sympathies for bandit activities. And so they are deploying what they call the non-kinetic approach, which for me is nothing but the appeasement of bandits. And because of that, banditry has grown wings, become cancerous, and has now become even more deadly a threat to Nigeria than even Boko Haram insurgency. Now, if you look at the way the Southeast has handled the IPOB crisis, for a long time, most people in the Southeast, including leaders, we are also on this sympathetic part of making excuses for why these young men and women are doing what they are doing. But when they realized that it was like cutting their nose to spite their own faces, we have seen a concerted action by governors of the Southeast, notably Governor Soludo, who has collaborated with the federal authorities to make sure that even the ideology behind IPOB separatism is now gradually being defeated in the Southeast, which was symbolized by his forceful opening of the largest market in West Africa the Onitsha market, which was shut down for many weeks, for many years, in solidarity with Nnamdi Kanu. He has forcefully, it's like he's trying to save his own people from themselves. That's leadership. We've not seen that kind of leadership either at the center or in the regions concerned where this security threat is about to consume the entire country. And again, this is because of the absence of social cohesion, the presence of identity politics, which created a majoritarian, ethnic and religious majoritarian kind of democracy, which can never yield anything positive in terms of welfare and security of citizens. So for me, these are the issues, in addition to other issues. And if Nigeria must go forward, we must evolve a higher consciousness than the one that created the problems we are faced with today. Thank you very much.
Yes, Dr. Dahiru, you have not disappointed in terms of your analysis, which is point on in terms of the importance of identity, and in this instance, more of ethnic identity in dealing with the realities of Nigeria. Perhaps I could suggest, because we have some minutes more, maybe if each one of you could summarize, even if you had said part of it before, because I note that in the efforts of Dr. Amadi and Dahiru, if you could, in 2 minutes, summarize what is to be done in moving the situation of that we face as a country, as a people. Of course, that doesn't, because I've listened to some in the discussion, if you feel nothing can be done, yes, it's fine. If we could do that quick, 2 minutes each, and then allow the audience to ask you questions, ask us questions and make contributions. I know that going for as long as you have has taken quite some time and strain, but would be appreciated. And if you feel that you don't have anything to add, that's also fine. Then we will go into the audience asking their own specific questions. Who wants to start in this second round?
Okay, Prof. Let me start very quickly while Majeed and Sam and Prof are taking their breath. I think it's a very good conversations, and I want to thank colleagues for also taking time to elaborate some of these driving factors, both in the context of the history of this country and the escalating dynamics of identity politics and how that has structured our economy, politics, and rule of law. And these are very important conversation. And it's as easy as saying that, okay, what to be done is to reverse those. But from where I sit, I also think that the identity politics itself is not cast in stone. It is not, yes, it has strong history from the nature of colonial governance, the structure they instituted, the ethnic hierarchy that were created, and how that shapes the engagement or the colonial rule, particularly in northern Nigeria with the native authority system, and how that shapes the ethno-religious relationship and the escalation that we have seen. But I think the concern here for me is, as important as the underlying factors were, as important as this history were, and I respect that, and it has been my argument for several years. I also think that one missing link that we often have is what are the socio-economic conditions that actually led to the escalations and the deepening of this identity politics and how it has resulted to violence today. And if you look at it from the 80s, when Nigeria began to liberalize the economy and the introduction of structural adjustment program, and the state's capacity to provide become increasingly weakened, and the structure of communities were abandoned, and rural development and interests completely withdrawn, social services collapsed, and particularly also in the northern part of the country, where already we were dealing with strong issues of crisis of education. And so over this period, you've seen the state withdrawing. And the moment the state withdrew from the public space, you also had a corresponding withdrawal of citizens from that space as well. Because the relationship between the state and citizens is a relationship of accountability. And so once one segment fails, then you're going to have a problem. When the state fails in its responsibility, you had a corresponding withdrawal of citizens from that space. And so even the discourse of Islamism and all that actually emerged was because of people's understanding that you can get it better under a particular theocratic structure, and that the theocratic structure will be more godly, more responsible, more accountable, because you are going to be managing the affairs of citizens according to the tenant of God, not the tenant of the state, and therefore accountability will ensure it. Majeed, if you remember, the first major hudud or criminal law enforcement under Sharia law in Zamfara state was Jangabi, who was a cattle rustler, and he got his hands amputated. And it went in, there was whole euphoria around it. Now here you come, accountability, oh, criminal justice under Sharia is more. But, and that was when cattle rustling was already brewing. And today, you've seen how in that same region, this cattle rustling had resulted to what we have today. I think for me, we have to bring back the state. And bringing back the state also means that we have to reclaim it. The state how do we get the state to become more responsible, more accountable, and through that also ensure the rule of law, because the rule of law does not hang. And that's my difference with lawyers. I'm not a lawyer, and some knows that I'm always arguing with them on this matter. The rule of law is not an abstract norm. The rule of law is connected to the social and economic dynamics of that society. It means nothing when the state is irresponsible. It just means nothing. And therefore, how do we get to bring the state back in? Because what has happened over this year is that we've rolled out the state. And the moment you roll out the state, nature abhors vacuum. Identity spaces will take over. And that's what we have seen, and that's what related to what I call disorder. My forthcoming work is on what I call state of anarchy, which try to explain these dynamics. So you created disorder, and disorder became an instrument of governance. The state became criminal. That the political class actually want to see disorder because disorder allows for impunity. It allows for corruption. So when you have rule of law, when the state become more responsible, there are certain things that you are not able to do. And so you can't do them. So you deliberately create that dysfunctional social system so that you can continue to build and do whatever you like without being questioned. Whether it is nepotism, as some try to explain earlier, or whether it's the whole gamut of using your ethno-religious identity to create space for yourself and all that will continue to come. So the role of the state remains very important. And in our kind of society, in a developing society with deep level of poverty, if you have the state that cannot provide, you have a problem. And that's what leads to what Sam was talking about. You have a government, but there is no governance, because the whole essence of governance is for the state to be able to provide. So, and as we have, and look, you live in a society that is highly, highly informal. The level of unemployment, the depth of poverty in the country is unimaginable. Nigerians' own survey indicates to us that over 93% of employed Nigerians are employed in the informal sector. So only 7%, that's Nigerian labor survey. It's a Nigerian by National Bureau of Statistics. 7%, only 7% of Nigerians are in that from the formal space. And that includes both the public sector and the private sector. 93% are in the informal space. And we also know that the nature of that informal space. So what we have is a society that has been badly beaten, has become dysfunctional. State has become extremely weak and ineffective. And therefore, if we have to make any progress, then it actually means that the state is very important in this regard. I don't agree with this whole discourse that, oh, the private sector will solve everything. All you just need to do, liberalize the economy, like the World Bank and the IMF has always been pushing, and increasingly have made the state to become totally irresponsible. So we need to bring the state back in. And bringing the state back in means that it has to be more responsible. And responsibility is also doing the soft things, not necessarily the hard thing. Look, what I do, I'm everywhere in the country on development and humanitarian work. And I go to states in this country, some of the states that are suffering from the worst kind of violence, and all the state provide are overhead bridges and underpasses. Level of literacy is very low. Educational enrollment is very poor. There is no services there is no health services, no basic infrastructure in rural communities. But what you are doing in the urban centers, in the name of urban renewal or what they see as development, is building overhead bridges, constructing airports where you actually don't need them. So we need to bring the state back in, but responsibly. And I think that's, for me, is one of the key things. Yes, the kinetic, or I hate it. I don't think the society is structured in this simplistic binary of what is kinetic and what is non-kinetic. And I know that our security people in the country love to put those things out there. Kinetic meaning using force, and non-kinetic actually meaning that you have to do non-force related kind of thing. I think the nature of this crisis we're dealing with does not warrant this binary. That most importantly, one, we have to find a way of ensuring that the increasing violence is tamed. And there are two major ways of taming that: getting the state to become more responsible. Some of the actions will have to be long-term. How do we get these young people back in school, ensuring that people's livelihood are properly protected? How do we ensure that the labor force, that the working population is able to find something doing and use their energy for more productive things than actually resorting to violence? The forests of northern Nigeria are some of the most difficult issues, because that makes even the crisis more intractable, because they serve as sanctuaries for this. And this forest, for a lot of people who don't understand, northern Nigeria has tens of these forests scattered across different states. And the history of this forest is actually connected to colonial rule. Part of what the colonial authorities did at that time was because of the massive size of the region, and some of them with very low population density. At that time, some parts of northern Nigeria had about 10 people per every square kilometers, very low. So what they did is to see how people can be forcefully clustered, and decided to map out areas and call those areas reserved areas. You can't farm there, you can't settle there, you can't do anything around there. And they use ecological reasons to explain that. But today, those places are not properly managed, and those elements have fully occupied those spaces. Nigerians need to decide what to do with those spaces. I don't really think that forest guard that they just recruited, in fact, is a suicide mission. I've said that in everywhere. You put any forest guard anywhere, they are just going to kill them in their multiples. And we have seen that already happening in Oyo State. We've had very recently some forest guards being killed in Borgu Game Reserve. We are also hearing forest guards being killed increasingly because there are structural issues that you have to deal with. And if we don't deal with that, we'll continue to struggle with some of these issues. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. I hear you. Of course, I used to deal with the issue of what is the state, and in dealing with the question of what is the state, can you separate a state from the interest of the, from the dominant interests in society? And so bringing back the state, to what extent is it going to solve our problem? But it is something that is worth thinking about, because to deal with some of this will remove the problem of ungoverned spaces. Who would want to say a few words before we, because I already have people who are identifying about wanting to talk. If we can have commentaries, and if none, we can start bringing in the audience. We thank the audience for their patience in listening all this while. Yes, how do we, I was going to call you actually. Okay, so please go ahead. How do we recreate and return to the perfect state?
Okay, so like I said, in sociological jurisprudence, it's the role of the government to actually organize different interests and merge different interests, manage different interests. Like I said, law is used as that instrument to engineer different interests towards a particular purpose. Let's start from what is our purpose as a country. We've been together for a while. Do we have a united purpose? Do we really have a defined agenda that the government is managing everyone towards? Then the role of the government, yes, is to use arms to crush dissidents who invariably should be in minute numbers. We call them dissidents because their interests cannot be understood or cannot be managed. But in a situation where you have a multitude becoming dissidents against the government, then there is a problem. You cannot continue to use arms. We cannot continue to distribute arms. We cannot continue to rely on international assistance with arms, killing ourselves, killing our citizens. There are alternatives to this. Like I mentioned earlier on, the wisdom of Asua that God has put in us, that we have the tendency to solve this problem. We have alternatives in here. We have the prominent principle of restorative justice, which deals less with killings and punishments, but more with doing everything to restore victims' integrity, to restore what has been destroyed using all forms of criteria, including, of course, like we have said, good governance, of course, a value system, which has to do with upholding the rule of law. We keep coming back to the rule of law because when you look at the basics of the rule of law, it says no one is higher than the law. We are equal before the law. If we are equal before the law, then people should not suffer basic fundamental human rights. People should not be deprived of basic fundamental human rights. Then on the issue of our relationship, like I said, insecurity is relational. Reorientation It's time to stop talking about what we used to be. The principle of Ajobi, our bats, allies, our race, our culture, our religious brothers. Now we to share a space. We cannot live within the family or true house. We have to interact. We are to share a space called Nigeria. We are to share a space called the world. The solution is for us to look inside of us through social cohesion, through shared unions, moral responsibilities, shared obligations, negotiated integrations. Let's look inside of us. What are the alternatives to killings? And because eventually, even when you sustain conquest with harmonitions, you breed generation of victims that will one day revolt and within seconds destroy the civilization you have built in centuries. So integration, you can share resources through negotiations. People can voluntarily secede their boundaries. You can walk around everything in diplomacy. So to me, less of harms, uphold the rule of law, restorative justice as a measure to at least repairing what has been lost. And I want to stop there.
Yes, thank you very much.
Hello,
You
Prof,
can take a rest
Prof,
until.
can I come in?
Oh, please do.
Just quickly, because I think that many people want to raise their hands in the panel. Hussain brought the issue around bringing back the state. You know, the state has failed. We say we want the state to come back and perform functions that require capacity. Then the question then is, what state? What form of state? Which state? You try to interrogate it. Now, the problem of political economy has always been the problem of the state. The origin of the state, whether from the neoliberal or the Marxian analysis, is about transformation. And three things are very important. First, coercion, management of violence, which the state is an expert, develops capability, as well as logic to justify, justificatory power. The state justifies use of violence, either by intersubjectivity with the victims or through hegemony idea, Gramscian idea. The problem with the state in Nigeria, when we say bring back the state, is what state are you bringing? The state, democratic, developmental state, theocratic, neo-feudal state, neoliberal, absent state. So I think at the normative level, there is a big contest around what should the state be. I mean, there was a sociologist who wrote a book many years ago, so bringing back the state. And the other one says, well, let me ask, what should the state be? Second issue is, even if the Nigerian state is reformed to be a humane, the kind of state that Aderonke is talking about, that is a negotiator, an argumentative state, a communicative state, rather than a very brutal, violent state. Then the second question will now be, how do you create enough incentive structure to justify the state's use of violence, the state's orientation towards public good, the common good? And that's the problem with even developing. I'm just alternating between a tutorial meeting on a project on democracy failure in West Africa. And the question we're asking is, how is democracy failing in West Africa? So what's happened to Nigeria is not just Nigeria, it's like a West African at the heart of it, an African. But you can see the same pattern of misbegotten states, how to change them, how to make them effective, make them legitimate, and change their orientation, solving one side of that puzzle, state power. The second side of it is more like what Aderonke is talking about, where we develop new ideas, new humanity, new feelings through social mobilization, through ethical orientation, through family. So people become better human beings. People become good ambassadors of Ifa, if I borrow a concept, okay, where they represent those ideals cultural ideas better. So that's the second half of that problem. So the first half is the state power. And it looks like what needs to be fixed is the state, the character of the Nigerian state. If you fix it, you're not going to get Eldorado. You won't solve all the security crisis. You will not, but you have a de-escalation. You have a reduction in what has become generalized violence, in my view. We are verging close to a state of anarchy. We are, even among the elites, there's no coherence in their exploitative strategy. There's no even self-interest. I mean, the idea is that elitist politics is to preserve themselves. We are seeing that logic break down, where the nature of elite exploitation and elite management is even self-defeating and self-destructive. So we're at a dangerous time because the Nigerian state, and the problem with a dysfunctional state, a almost murderous state, is that it escalates, it recreates violence at a scale. It both takes it up and bring it down to distill it down to homes and granular level, families, individuals. So each of those people begin to mirror and represent and embody the functionality of the state. And that's why some of the person-to-person violence in this country is alarming. People say, how can this happen? It's because, in a way, the state transmutes and transfers its that functionality and its mimetics. It kind of carries a mimicry of violence and transforms and translates to everybody. Find out what's the way out, sir. Prescriptions may not be very good for this kind of forum, but if I would say something, I think there should be three things happen at the same time. I think there should be some level of clarity of how far we've gone down. Clarity is always should precede action. One of the things Nigeria suffers is lack of a commitment to philosophy, to ideas. Sometimes they too much tourism. People like to fix problems. So we know the problem, let's fix it. If you before this issue, when I was power sector, where I was chief regulator, they say too much grammar. Let's fix it. It must be more engineers. It must be more reform. Today, the government of Nigeria has announced what they call grid asset organization, a new company. And I asked myself, is there a diagnosis of what the problem is organizational, or is it the problem is idea? So I think we should stay on a little bit on dimension the problem properly. We always assume we know the problem, we want the answer. That should happen. Clarity on the problem, diagnosis. Two, that should happen is maybe some level of civic engagement with politics. One of the problems of political society is the quality of political action. A political community, whether a Yoruba nation, Igbo nation, Fulani nation, or whether Nigeria, or whether a state or local government, is managed through political action. So I think there's a Nigerian abundance of political action. The professors, some of the smart people who are here today, we were not sufficiently engaging in political action. I don't necessarily mean political party or elections, but political action, because without a political, coherent, rational, appropriate political action, you cannot create political transformation, which is important. And finally, for me, it then means that whereas we work to reform the state, which is a problem in African thesis, we should also work to reform non-state political organizations, civic centers, cultural life, the universities, the academia. But these transmit over time the signals, the radiation that builds back into the nature of the state. So we will not recover Nigeria in the next 5-10 years, but if we rebuild civic life, the cultural centers, academia, civil society, family, community, civic organizations, we might perhaps in the next 20 years generate enough new clarity, new knowledge, new capabilities and norms that will help to defreeze the country as it is right now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I thank you very, very, very much for your contribution. Definitely, we've had some reasonable diagnoses today. It seems I'm losing some of the people who are indicating wanting to talk, but I still have three. At one point, it should have been six. then it became 5, then it became 4. But yes, Dahiru, any additional say? We can't hear you, or I cannot. Hello? I don't know if others can hear Dr. Dahiru. Maybe it's only me.
Okay, so I've not been unmuted now.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so thank you once again, and let me also thank my colleagues that they've all, preferred very, very, very good solutions. And I want to agree very, very much with Dr. Abdu Hussaini's assertion about the reinvention of the state. And let me also say that I agree with him completely that the state has a role in economic production. And like him, I do not believe that the private sector should take over the means of production, particularly. However, let me just add that because our political leaders, most of whom were thrown off from a system that was predatory, that was parasitic, chose the easy way out of abandoning governance for politics when they embraced that philosophy, the neoliberal philosophy of government having no business in business, which led to the collapse of public enterprises, the collapse of government effort to create jobs in line with the Constitution. This is still a function of identity politics, crazy lazy leaders who only know how to distribute rents and royalties from Nigeria's internal resources, mostly from crude oil. They cannot lift a hoe to till the land. It's not longer in their business. As long as there is monthly flows of allocation, the party goes on. And that is why in reinventing the state, which is very important, which is at the crux of all of this matter, we may have gone beyond the era of benevolent dictators because we're no longer in a military, not the military rule. We are now a democracy, but how we look at it. So to do that, I think the responsibility is now on the citizens. And that is why something that Dr. Amadi said about political participation now comes to mind and should be considered as germane. I think the weakest link in our democracy value chain has been the political party system. And to correct that, those of us that believe now that we need a new approach, we need to now evolve a new consciousness of doing things differently from how it was done before, must come together under a banner. Call it coalition of the willing, if you like. We want to now see Nigerians going away from just the sidelines, from the CSO world, from the academia, from the media, coming together to form political parties, if you like, pressure groups, think tanks, just whatever it is that we can do as form of participation, to see if we can shift the paradigm from identity politics to true liberal democratic tenets, where citizens can come together and elect a leadership that will dispense good governance as a reward system for political participation, rather than patronage and a corrupt one at that for political participation. So for me, the key here, the crux of the matter is, how do we defeat the cancer of identity politics, the kind we have in Nigeria, along with vandalism and corruption with it, to bet a new order? And to do this, we must come together, all of us. And in coming together, we must set aside our religious differences, our ethnic differences, our regional differences, and understand that until we understand and see the oneness in us as a people, the kind of prescription that Dr. Adegbite is giving about only, social engineering, empathetic kind of citizenship may not necessarily occur. And this brings me to a very important issue that I would like us to have positions going forward. I have always maintained that contrary to entrenched narratives, Nigerians are not as diverse or disparate as we want to assume, of southern and northern Nigeria, Nigerians from every corner of this country, as when constituted, had much more in common than differentiates us. So essentially, for me, the Nigerian state is simply a legacy of the Nigerian cultural commonwealth that span across this country and beyond. Why am I making this point? This should be easy for us to unite as a people and evolve enough social cohesion to have a common agenda for collective development. And it will be interesting, it will be in our interest rather for all of us to come together and begin to pursue this belief of our oneness, geographic proximity, shared history, similarity in culture, and above all, our common humanity as Black African people. If we're able to evolve this new consciousness of our oneness does not mean purity, does not mean you're no longer Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, no. Oneness simply means we are Nigerians. And in electing our leadership anywhere in the country, we must understand it is the service to the people and not interest of any ethnic or regional sectional tendency. So we must now grow Nigeria into a country, or should I say evolve Nigeria from a country of tribesmen to a nation of citizens, where it is possible to be Hausa and Anambra, Igbo and Lagos, Yoruba and Kano, and where equity, fairness, and justice reign supreme, where our democratic citizenship is upheld in a manner that now allows our democracy to produce the best amongst us, to lead on behalf of others. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks a lot. I'm glad that we have come to this stage. It's been a fantastic effort. I don't want to put my own skepticism on some of these things on the table, but to mention that I'm always amused when we talk about democracy. And it seems to me that we just very easily equate civil rule as democracy, because people can now elect or claim to be electing or selecting, whichever one you want to do. And that also, another thing that Nigerians relish is talking about, our political parties. And I don't think you have any political party. I have suggested that what we have are shifting alliances of thieves that we call political parties. In any case, not to take too much time, let's hear the questions and or comments from the 4 people who have who have indicated the desire to contribute. I have Godwin Sogolo, Monte Makmochi, Ibiba Odili, and Kemi Seriki. I don't want to be partial to recognize Monte Makmochi, who our paths had crossed in 1 or 2 places in my professional life. We have a 5th person, but let's start with Godwin Sogolo, being the first to have indicated a desire to. Can you kindly unmute Godwin Sogolo, and video access also could be useful. And maybe if they have, you can kindly unmute yourself if they have done at their own end. Mute yourself, Godwin Sogolo.
Yes, thank you. I was still muted. Thank you very much,
Okay.
Professor Badijo. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof, for the opportunity. It's been a very enlightening evening, and I congratulate all our discussants for this kind of opportunity. It appears, first, this is a general observation and a question to all the discussants. It appears that almost every one of you has traced insecurity issues to political challenges. Are there no insecurity problems that have no connection with politics? That's just my general question. The other observation I have is that I want to caution against oversimplification, theoretical oversimplification. For instance, Dr. Aderonke Esther Adegbite's distinction between the fourth state of harmony as depicted in Yoruba, traditional Yoruba thought, it conflicts definitely with the Hobbesian, state of nation. But you see, both theories are theoretical constructions. When we were young as undergraduates, we used to make the error of thinking that these were historical theories or that they had historical content. Of course, they do not have such historical content. They're not factual things. No, there was no state of the first state in Yoruba culture that was purely harmonious, nor was there any in what Hobbes seemed to speak about where there was conflict in all human societies. So I just want to caution that we have to be careful when we talk about these theoretical constructions. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. We can take Monty McMurchie.
Greetings from Toronto, Canada. I'm in my basement bunker in Toronto. First of all, allow me to commend each of the speakers, including the moderator, who did most excellent, because I have gained many insights. Allow me these few thoughts. Nigeria, as with many of the other African countries, are blessed with peoples intelligent, ambitious, and sincerely dedicated to doing least harm. Sadly, we in the West, and particularly in Nigeria, the British colonial system really mucked things up with the indirect rule. And your great author, late great author, Chinua Achebe, in his 5 novels, articulated this manifestly extremely well and elegant. Stay with your own values. Do not necessarily ascribe to what I call Potemkin apparat facades. And power is greed, it's financial, and it's aggrandizement. Easier said than done. It's long-term, and it requires moral courage and ethical courage, which even in the Western Canada and the United States is difficult. And the solution is not easy. It's not simplistic. Talk is good, but talk can only get you so far. Nigeria shortly will be running out of oil, and relying on the oil revenues will be catastrophic when those revenues dry up. You need to empower the formal economy. You need to engage with the youth. You need to start with civics, what I call in the most little school, when the young boy and the young girl, from regardless of tribes or ethnicity, recognize each others as compatriots and friends and all needing assistance. And then it grows as the education system migrates up, becoming a little more intense, more sophisticated. Violence is really the last refuge of a traitor or a rebel. And again, to add, it requires stamina on the ground by Nigerian citizens, and the political leadership class, for the greater part, sadly has failed for a variety of reasons. And it needs to go back to what I call your tribal values in terms of where the big man, the older man, is respected, and judgment and age is honored, as opposed to being discarded because with new times. Because wisdom is something, an element which is powerful, and wisdom is the transubstantiation which can transfuse and aggregate. And for this, I thank you very much, and I look forward to your comments. Wishing you all good speed. And to you, Femi, long time no talk.
Yes. Thank you very much, Monty McMurchy. Madam Ibiba Odili.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, Prof. I'm very delighted to be part of this series talking about insecurity, and I appreciate the submissions made by our chair, our panelists. They were all on point, and I agree with them that the risk factors for insecurity must be addressed. It would just be like you're treating the symptom without looking at the disease, and all of them have helped in diagnosing some of the areas of focus where they think is promoting the insecurity, and also giving some very actionable recommendations. But for me, each time I speak, especially on issues of insecurity, I want to go back home to the family, that micro unit. How secure is the family in Nigeria today? The parents, are they economically secured? Are they socially secured? Are they emotionally secured? Are they culturally secured? Because if the home is threatened, then what quality of children will be raised from the homes to drive these processes that we're talking about when we talk of national development? And let us not forget that Nigeria has a very high youthful population. And most of the people engaged in some of these insecurity actions mostly are within this youthful age bracket. So the home is somewhere that we should really pay much attention to. It will be like a bottom to top approach. There are certain countries, developed countries, that even have national parenting goals that drive the interventions for parenting. But here, everybody is left to do it any which way they like. And I'm happy Dr. Amadi mentioned rejuvenating certain micro spaces, and he mentioned communities, and he mentioned the family. The family is very critical because today's parents in Nigeria, mothers we are hearing are forming Yahoo Mothers Association, promoting their children's involvement in cybercrime. Mothers and fathers are coming to fight law enforcement agents for arresting their children involved in drug trafficking. So these are some of the areas we are seeing where parents themselves are beginning to normalize some of these issues and think it is just the way to go because of loss of values, because some of the interventions that ought to come to them, maybe from government and other spaces, are not adequate. So this is security. It's not just from, in the national space. It is beginning from the family, and I think the family should be paid much attention so that families, parents can be enabled, parents can be empowered, parents can be able to raise children who would help drive these processes and in turn reduce the level of insecurity, which is very concerning in Nigeria today. Thank you.
Yes, I thank you very, very much, especially for your brevity. We are running out of time very, very fast, and we've really had a great evening. Madam Kemi Seriki. We cannot hear you yet. Unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for putting this panel together because I really enjoy this conversation. Anytime I actually tune into Dr. Falola's forum, I really always gain something from it. And the panelists gave a real depth of the issue affecting Nigeria. And I would have wished, I'm located in United States, I would have wished more Nigerians abroad would have tuned into this conversation. 2 days ago, there's a guy on Al Jazeera called Hassan Mehdi, who was head-to-head, and he has Nigerians, politicians, some of these advisors to the president now, coming there to come and talk about issue affecting Nigeria. Even for ordinary 2 days, the people who already watched that series, is almost to 1 million, views. And I would have wished more Nigerians abroad would tune in into this conversation. It should be over 10,000 people tuning in. Because this problem in Nigeria is not only taking place in Nigeria, even is affecting we Nigerians abroad. Because we bring the same mentality that we have back home, we bring it abroad. You can never find a joint organization of Nigerians that are actually fighting for the benefit of Nigerians in America. Everybody's divided according to their religious group, according to, ethnic group, even among African in per se in general. Because in America here, you have the Latino community addressing issue, even though they are so diverse that is affecting Latino community, but we cannot find African commonality to come together, even in the West, to address our issue. So I want to ask the panelists if they can just, answer this question. How does the adoption, I know we were colonized, we were given, pulled together, different, ethnic group, different set of people put together as one nation. How does the adoption of democracy that is so foreign to us affect the development of our nation as Nigeria? Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks a lot for that interesting perspective you have added, and the fact that we probably need to broaden more beyond what we are achieving. Of course, I should note that this is not limited to the few people on Zoom only. There is also, there are those who are watching the live stream, and it will still be carried further in terms of excerpts of what we are doing and the media coverage. But yes, it is true that we could get more people. Can I have Mr. Olusegun Adekoya? And then we'll finish with Godfrey O and have comments or specific questions answered so that we can round up in about 10 minutes. Olusegun O. Well, okay. If Olusegun O is not ready, we can go on to Godfrey O. I mean, if Olusegun Adekoya is not ready, we can go on to Godfrey O. Yes, Mr. Godfrey.
Yes, thank you very much, the moderator, the panelists. Though I came very late, but so far I listened to two speakers. And first of all, I would like to start with this. We can't talk about insecurity without looking at it at the grassroots. One of the speakers said something about the state integration, of which I agreed on that aspect, because definitely insecurity is within the state is just a microcosm of a larger perspective nationally. So I think we should look at insecurity at the grassroots level, which is the state, the local government area, so as to tackle the issue of insecurity within our nation. Thank you very much.
A lot. I will take, and that's the final, the comments or question from David. Just a David that just went off again. I think it's the problem of network. Okay, so it's been a very great evening, and we've had quite interesting exchange of ideas on the Toyin Falola interviews. Of course, the more of these interviews will come your way, and they would be advertised and and shared. I would still like to indulge David Adejo because it's coming off and on, but I know it may not be his problem. Are you able to come on now, David Adejo? Okay. The off and on network, as we call it in Nigeria, is the problem in this instance. We'll go on to any of the panelists that may want to make any comments or any rounding up. Yes, Dr. Adegbite.
Thank you very much. May I respond to the gentleman Godwin Sogulu? I didn't get the title on 2 points. Virtually all discussants this evening acknowledge that the term insecurity is multidimensional, and none of us actually talk with political insecurity. We mentioned I mentioned cyber insecurity, social insecurity. So we've actually mentioned all the types of insecurity that are interwoven. Then on oversimplifying issues, I'll also appeal that we stop complicating issues. We stop borrowing ideas that we are not familiar with, that keep complicating our systems. I will disagree with the fact that IFA jurisprudence does not exist. I will disagree with the fact that IFA does not have a solution to harmonious living. Even if it does not exist, it is saying that we have what it takes to return back or to build, if we are not coming from there, to build an utopian state. So why would we think we can't do so? What exactly gives the impression that we cannot do so? Because we actually have living countries on Earth with low or zero level of insecurity. So why won't we believe our jurisprudence? We have indigenous jurisprudence that are sophisticated if interpreted in the light of even global inventions. So I think we should look into that. There's no need really complicating matters to an extent where everything has gone, everything is in disarray. We keep having professionals, evolutions of borrowed traditions, grammar, big economics, big English, big science. We are saying we can do it from the foundation. Why not? Let's look into that. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Some of these issues take quite some effort in understanding the basis for some of the arguments or suggestions. Who wants to say something in reaction?
Okay, so can I just pick a few points?
Dr. Amadi, yes, please.
Yes. I think Professor Sogolo, if I understand the same Sogolo of formerly of Gaida, made some useful points. I think I agree that Aderonke also responded well. I don't think it's a case of saying that this jurisprudence is ideas, it's about thoughts, about processes. So yes, but he probably was saying that those ideal states probably never existed. So these are, conceptualization of the ideal. And you're right. So we can also build towards that. But I think what I will respond to is the point he raised about simplification. It applies in all forms of thought. And Aderonke's response about the danger of complication is also an important one to be at home, because oftentimes things might be simple, but we make them more complex, and therefore when we apply the complex solutions, they don't work. But again, I think what I take away is that the danger of one narrative or not really embedding the notion in the social context in which they emerge. What it is I am learning is to if you look at old thinkers, whether conservatives or old thinkers, they are careful about nuances because they proceed from reality, how things appear, and then examine them and build principles deriving from what is. So our society also, in thinking about its insecurity, like another part of what I think Hussain talked about, we can generalize. Each of these contexts have similar but also divergent factors and variables that contribute to them. So some things are common: state failure, inequality in access to resources. They could be common irresponsibility in terms of governance, or bringing back the state or harrowing out the state. But how they interact with other variables matter. So my last point will be that I know that even just like the conversation we had with a group, we're working a tutorial group on democracy failure in West Africa, some of the people are pushing back. And someone asked the question, can we say democracy has failed in America? So if we think that the failure of neoliberal democracy in West Africa amounts to democracy failure in West Africa, can we say democracy failed in America? And what that brings out is that democracy, dimensions of it, may have failed in America. Dimensions of it may be thriving in Nigeria. In the same way, like I started by saying that insecurity looks like also a state of human nature. That means we have always had insecurity with us. They take different forms. But what we're doing with Nigeria is maybe a very heightened form of brutish physical insecurity. And it should be addressed, once we have that, we know the other dimensions, social insecurity. We have psychological, other form of security. But what we're dealing with that is very maybe challenging is that brutish physical lack of insecurity, that people generalize fear. Again, final word. Oftentimes people associate it with rise of criminality. In my sense that criminality may rise, but insecurity will not rise at the same time. People have capacity to manage those crimes. Maybe the law enforcement manages them. People commit crime, they're arrested. You can't say, for example, US is as insecure in that sense as Nigeria today. But probably it has a high level of crime, even violent crime, than in Nigeria. But people don't have the total sense of lack of security, of helplessness, that they can't even go back in some places to their villages. But the crime happened. So isolating these things and understanding how they manifest and what can be done will help us to solve manageable problems. So right now, I think the major issue is the failure of the state. The fact that what we are dealing with is the fact that nowhere is effectively governed. Rules don't determine. Enforcement fail. Norms fail. Basically nobody is watching it. Nobody is really dealing with this, whether through kinetic or non-kinetic means. That's really the challenge. And fixing that has a short-term, medium-term, and long-term. We can begin to, create more effective, responsible space. We can also deal with underlying factors that make our society much more legitimate, much more fair, and in the long term, much enduring and endearing to people, and therefore insecurity will be probably in a sustainable way managed. That's all I would like to say.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? I want to avoid interposing myself into the issue, the Godwin Sogolo, Aderonke Esther debate, because it will be interesting. It's to look at whether the Bible or the Quran are factual. I know that it is a major problem to even raise that question with respect to the Quran in terms of the adherence. But people just didn't dream up. If you are part of it, or as they say in Nigerian parlance, if you know, you know, the different books that are involved that people memorized, but I cannot give a copy to you as to description of society. You are right. At what point was society being described? If you ask those who are adherents of that, they will say from the beginning of time. Now, but we have lost much of this, our original background, and we are all vacillating in Abrahamic religions as the truth. That's a problem on its own. But I don't want to, I want to thank everybody that has been involved in putting this together, and quite a lot of effort has gone into doing that. Many people back on the back door, the scene trying to make us communicate so nicely across the globe, literally. And we appreciate the time of the panelists and everybody, and look forward to the next Toyin Falola interviews on a topic that will be shared as soon as. And on behalf of Professor Falola, who could only listen, I don't know if he has now succeeded in boarding the plane to leave Houston for Austin, traveling from Miami and taking like almost 36 hours to do that as a result of weather problem. I thank you all and appreciate. You can still stay on and listen to some of the music that our team will put on. Thanks a lot. And I see that people had to break their fast. The sacrifice that you put into being part of this, Dr. Abdu, Dr. Dahiru, is very, very much appreciated. And of course, I don't know if my brother Sam Amadi is also in the Lenten mood, and Dr. Professor Adegbite also. All the very best. We thank you for a very great contribution to today, and we'll see you next time.
There is fire on the mountain, and nobody seems to be on the run. Oh, there is fire on the mountain top, and no one is running. I wake up in the morning, tell you what I see on my TV screen. I see the blood of an innocent child, and everybody's watching. Now I'm looking out my window, and what do I see? I see an army of soldiers across the street.
The thing is, no, they didn't change the background.